Thank you for everything.
Well, good evening. My name is Graham Allison. I'm the director of the Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs here at the Kennedy School. And it's my very great honor to welcome you to the forum on behalf of Harvard's Center for International Affairs, Harvard's Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs, and the John F. Kennedy School of Government, and especially to honor and to welcome our distinguished guest, the President of Finland, Martti Ahtisaari. As the President has noted himself, he became Finland's President in perhaps the most interesting of times. His presidency has spanned a period of very deep and radical transitions for Finland, beginning with his election in February of '94, where he is the first person in history to be elected by direct popular vote as President of Finland. Even more remarkable has been the past year of transitions in the world in the setting in which he served as president. The ending of the Cold War, an information revolution around the world about which he will say more, the European and international institutions expanding and deepening their roles. Through these transitions, under President Ahtisaari's leadership, Finland has emerged as a player on the international stage. One measure of this change and Finland's role in it is the fact that President Ahtisaari has traveled more throughout the world in his first year in office than his predecessor did in his entire term of 6 years. And we're very glad that those travels have brought him to Harvard, which we have never had the honor of having before. During his first year in office, President Ahtisaari secured Finland's membership in the European Union, and since then has become one of the major advocates of the EU, arguing persuasively that the Union is a guarantor not only of economic growth, but also of greater security for Finland and for all of its member states. The President continues to promote the development of a common European security area based primarily on NATO's Partnership for Peace program, the OSCE, and most importantly, the Western European Union in the context of EU and the new EMU. President Ahtisaari is perhaps uniquely qualified to reflect on the changes in the world environment today, the world arena, the topic of his remarks. He was born in 1937 in the rural north of Finland, a territory that had been part of Russia since World War II. An accomplished diplomat, he spent much of his career working in Africa with the Finnish Ministry of Foreign Affairs and with the United Nations. He joined the Ministry of Foreign Affairs Department for International Development Cooperation in 1965, eventually becoming Deputy Director of the department. He was appointed Finland's ambassador to Tanzania and later also ambassador to Zambia, Somalia, and Mozambique. He served as a member of the Senate of the Institute of Namibia. From 77 to 81, he served as the UN Commissioner for Namibia, and from 78 to 91 as Special Representative of the UN Secretary General to Namibia. During this period, he oversaw Namibia's peaceful transition to independence and the country's first democratic elections. And, quote, almost impossible feat, close quote, to quote a former American ambassador to Finland. Between 84 and 86, Mr. Ahtisaari served as Finland's Undersecretary of State in charge of international development and cooperation, as well as Governor of Finland for the African, Asian, and Inter-American Development Banks. and the International Fund for Agricultural Development. There's so many different dimensions to this man. I don't want to and will not do justice to all of them, but let me mention just several other features, because I know that a number of members of our community are not as well informed, and indeed I wasn't until I began doing a little research on this topic. He's also, in another facet of his remarkable career, served as chairman of the board of directors for the Finnish Industrialization Fund for Developing Countries. He was at the UN in '87 as Undersecretary General for Administration and Management, a post in which he served until '91. At that point, he returned again to Finland in order to serve as Secretary of State. And then back in '92-'93, he served as chairman of the Bosnia-Herzegovina Working Group at the UN of the International Conference on the former Yugoslavia, and as special representative of the Secretary General for the former Yugoslavia. Today, as President of Finland, Mr. Ahtisaari confronts the modern global challenges armed with decades of experience in development, political transitions, and international crisis management. In a world in which the neutrality of states, as during the Cold War, no longer seems relevant, Finland, under President Ahtisaari's leadership, is defining a new role, a role of active international involvement tempered by a protected, independent defense, deeper integration into European institutions, tempered by a vocal opposition to potential dividing lines. As President Ahtisaari said, assessing his first year in office, quote, "I think I am the president for today's Finland. I don't think I would have been able to serve in this capacity 20 years ago." It's thus with very great pleasure that this year we welcome to Harvard the President of Finland, Petteri Ahtisaari.
Actually, I have to make a confession, first of all, that when you listen to this sort of friendly words, at least one thing is sure, you start feeling very old. when all the accomplishments have been mentioned. First of all, I would like to say that it's very nice to be back here. I have been here, I was not a president then, but perhaps it was a good omen that in the early 80s I was speaking in the course here, because we have always had in the International Center one person serving, and we have our present ambassador, Ambassador Laajava, has been going through a year, and he just confessed that this was the best year of his lifetime. Our present Secretary of State, Mr. Valtasaari, who used to be the ambassador in Washington as well, is also the member of that school. So it has been a good omen for all of us. My topic tonight is the words a global international system in the 21st century. Let me first say how pleased I am to address this distinguished audience. Harvard is a symbol of American academic and intellectual tradition. As a Finn, I have always taken great pride in the fact that the first Finns came to these shores 360 years ago. We were among the very first settlers and consider ourselves as part of the development of the American nation. However, now that I am at Harvard, I'm reminded of the compelling fact that when we Finns settled in a modest colony in the Delaware Valley area, this fine institution had already been established, if only for a couple of years. Since those times, Harvard has always maintained its quest for excellence. It is indeed an honor to speak here. I arrived a couple of days ago to the United States from Strasbourg, France, where the summit meeting of the Council of Europe was held. Most European heads of state were in attendance. The United States participated as an observer. The meeting adopted a document outlining new actions in the field of human rights. It also focused on new security risks and a common concerns such as crime, corruption and child abuse. Indeed, the security agenda for the 21st century must include the concerns and problems of the civic society at large, not only politics among nations. Let me remind you of another historic fact. Next year is the 350th anniversary of the 1648 Peace of Westphalia. This peace accord created a system of nation-states interacting peacefully with one another. Unfortunately, the system failed. It could not prevent politico-military competition for hegemony in Europe. We all know the results. Only since the end of the Cold War have realistic prospects emerged to reshape the international system on the basis of cooperation and integration as military competition gradually recedes. A new system is emerging in which Asia will take its place. The United States is the only actor that has a truly strategic role throughout the globe. It will have to fulfill its tasks in promoting stability and change with Europe, the Asia-Pacific area, as well as with Latin America. My theme today is globalization and its implications. In the best tradition of Stanley Hoffman, Harvard's distinguished professor on the civilization of France, I have tried to divide my topic into three basic themes. First, globalization and mutual interdependence. Secondly, the implications of globalization for Europe and its institutions. Third, new actions and initiatives by the international community to cope with globalization. Of course, my perspective will be that of Finland. You may rightly ask what particular wisdom Finland may have to offer on this vast topic. I remember an article in the Business Week magazine some time ago. It was about a small Finnish electronics firm that had just established a subsidiary in Silicon Valley. Why did you come here? The interviewer asked. Because, the CEO answered, in this business you have to be where the markets are. In Silicon Valley, if a small, innovative group of engineers makes a discovery in their garage and open the door, they have all the potential buyers on their doorstep. In Finland, what would such engineers have at their doorstep? Most probably 3 feet of snow. This was of course true. Yes, the snow is still there, but we learned to do it our way. The company was Nokia, the product was a cellular phone, and the rest is history. Globalization has developed dramatically since the Cold War. It now encompasses economic interaction, ideas and information technology, culture, and even the labor force. Distance ceases to be a decisive factor in the overall competition for market share. The worldwide movement of production, capital, and information has become easier and more widely used. Information technology has increased efficiency and competition tremendously. Unfortunately, this development has also led to widespread job losses and to increasing unemployment. These developments present a formidable challenge. Will economic globalization and the information revolution improve the daily lives of people not only in the developed but also in the developing world? Economic growth in Southeast Asia, China and India has been hectic. The door to prosperity has been opened for hundreds of millions of people. Although several countries have suffered setbacks, the prospect of their economic growth ending is not on the cards. There are, of course, doubts as to whether this success story can be initiated everywhere. Many developing nations insist that they must concentrate on development as such. I find this argument hard to accept. There is very little evidence to prove that a fertile mix of free trade, good government, and grassroots entrepreneurship would not extend the benefits of globalization to every corner of the world. The potential is exciting, provided that democratically mandated governments in cooperation with business fulfill their role. If they do not, the gap between the developing and developed world, as well as within societies, will widen. Growing economic interdependence also creates problems that have to be resolved if all are going to reap the benefits of globalization. How do we deal with increasing environmental problems, of which the extensive forest fires in Southeast Asia are just one example? How do we cope with the nutritional and energy needs of the ever-growing population, and with disparities with regard to access to technology and knowledge? A great portion of the world's population is still deprived politically, culturally, and economically. The level of suffering is not diminishing as we would wish. Development, making more of everything, doing everything better, educating more and more people, extending electricity to the smallest communities may not be the only answer. We need to look at development also from an individual viewpoint related to reality and especially to local reality. There are, of course, no simple answers. Everyone understands that economics and technology are the driving forces that will make the world a smaller place. But there is more to it than cellular phones or the internet. There is even more to it than markets or sustainable economic growth. There is a political dimension that we cannot afford to overlook. Globalization must provide for a more effective participation in order to ensure that its fruits are spread more equitably among different segments of the population and among the nations of the world. First, we must develop international cooperation, re-evaluate and rethink the dialogue, negotiation and decision-making mechanisms of the international community. The new mechanism or system of international cooperation that we should work for could be multi-leveled. There is now more room for regional as well as global arrangements. New standards, norms and procedures for decision-making must be set. Examples of such widely binding normative arrangements include disarmament processes, environmental protection, as well as the liberalization of the world trade through the World Trade Organization. Second, we must develop closer interaction between economic and political regional entities, including the European Union, NAFTA, and ASEAN. Trade wars will benefit none. Of course, it is of vital importance to strengthen transatlantic cooperation, particularly between the European Union and the United States. Its new prospects must be studied with vigor. Third, we have to realize that existing international organizations correspond to a world which to a large extent no longer exists today. That the United Nations needs streamlining and needs to become more effective, we can all agree. Reform is in the interest of all member states, big and small alike. Where else but at the United Nations could we deal with truly global issues, international peace and security, the new security threats from uncivilized society, environmental degradation, human rights, poverty, and uncontrolled population growth. The United Nations has a global mandate and global legitimacy. These are unique assets, and let us not waste them. It encourages me that the United States is moving the word providing the financial support to the United Nations that it legally owes. Just as important as the reform of the United Nations is the development of the World Trade Organization. Integrating big powers such as Russia and China into the World Trade Organization is not only in their interest, but will benefit us all. I'm pleased to recognize increasing support for efforts to integrate developing countries into the multilateral trading system. Trade, not aid, is a valid and objective as ever. However, this requires that we in the developed world open up our markets to ensure market access for those countries and give our support to strengthen their trading capacity. Protectionism has no future in our interdependent world. One of the most important challenges in managing globalization is that of adapting to a world in which capital moves freely. The biggest upheaval in international money markets will be the advent of a common European currency. Its goals are to improve monetary stability in Europe and provide protection against currency speculation. But the euro also poses a formidable challenge. It has been estimated that with the introduction of the common European currency, there will be a major portfolio diversification from dollars to euros. If not well managed, this may lead to destabilization and misalignments that could severely affect the whole international monetary system. It is evident that sound cooperation between the EU and the US, as well as within the IMF, is urgently needed. Globalization also touches upon important ethical questions: education, birth control, and equality within the societies. And when dealing with these, we have to realize that in this global family, not all share the same values, at least not yet. Let me also discuss the role of regional cooperation in managing globalization. The co-organization in Europe as to the economic and political integration is no doubt the European Union. Simply put, in the face of growing globalization, the role of the nation states has weakened. The EU aims at meeting this challenge in a number of ways: institutional, economic, and political. The historic importance of the European Union is to cement joint values of peace, stability, and prosperity in Europe. Now the Union is about to embark upon a major enlargement. I already briefly referred to the important mandate of the Council of Europe in the field of human rights and civic society. The Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, OSCE, fulfills the function of a general regional organization. States should make every effort to achieve a peaceful settlement of local disputes through the OSCE before referring them to the UN Security Council. But we understand that the historical importance of the OSCE has been to help dismantle the Cold War division of Europe. Today, the OSCE has an important preventive function. In Bosnia, it has been in charge of civilian aspects in urging the parties to fulfill their obligations deriving from the Dayton Accords. The real challenge in the present system in Europe is not only defense against war, but the conduct of peace. NATO is undergoing the most important transition in its history in both respects. In the first area, restructuring and enlargement are underway. In the second, NATO's greatest task is to build peace in Bosnia. The operation is, in practical terms, carried out by NATO together with partners from outside the alliance. SFOR, as the operation is called, doubtless will serve as a model for handling situations where political peace efforts need strong military backing. The newly established Euro-Atlantic Partnership Council, EAPC, is a suitable forum for consultations on NATO-led operations where NATO members and non-members are involved. We have to make more use of it. The NATO Partnership for Peace program creates practical prerequisites for these activities. Let me share with you some ideas on another aspect of regional effort. I want to speak about Europe's north. Here I can rely on Finland's historic role. As early as 1878, a native Finn, Adolf Erik Nordenskiöld, a famous explorer, sailed around the Arctic coast of Europe and Asia, thus discovering the Northeast Passage. He was among the first to globalize our region by bringing Europe to Asia via the north. This is not, of course, the only reason why Finns always emphasize the importance of Northern Europe in the global sense. The idea of a northern dimension in Europe has been part of political terminology for some time. For Finland, the northern dimension is a wide-ranging concept. Geographically, we include in it the region from Iceland in the west to northwestern Russia in the east, and from the Arctic Ocean in the north to the southern shores of the Baltic Sea. Not only the countries around the Baltic Sea, but all the other Nordic countries, Great Britain, the US and Canada, are more or less directly part of this northern region. Finland has taken the initiative in promoting a new policy for the northern dimension within the European Union. The ultimate goal of such a policy is peace and stability, with prosperity and security shared by all nations. Developing the northern dimension with its wide scope and implications is also making the Union a more effective global actor. Our purpose is to present the long-term advantages that the northern dimension can offer the European Union as a whole. It is an area rich in resources, containing some of the world's largest reserves of natural gas and oil, resources of strategic importance. There is a potential for trade too. If the remaining obstacles to it can be removed, trade is estimated to grow tenfold by the year 2010 between the countries bordering the Baltic Sea. There are great opportunities, but also huge problems in the northern region. Some of the biggest sources of pollution and the most serious nuclear hazards exist in the region. Differences in standards of living, health, social conditions, and the extent of the rule of law are enormous. Civic security is threatened by increasing organized crime, including drug trafficking. We do not seek new instruments to finance cooperation in the northern dimension. National governments, bilateral donors, international financing institutions, and the European Union programs all play their role in this cooperation. What we are strongly emphasizing is the need to coordinate all efforts for maximum benefit to the beneficiaries, to set priorities, and to attain equality. The northern dimension is a unique challenge for the future not only of Europe, but of all the northern region. That is why Finland looks for support for our initiative from all our partners. As a Finn and a European, I want to stress how important it is that Europe and United States work together in order to promote what we share in a globalizing world. We are bound together by natural ties. The transatlantic economic flow makes our societies highly interdependent. The EU and the US constitute the biggest trade and investment community in the world. There is, however, something deeper than hard economic facts. Many in this country, and probably many in this audience, have their roots in the old continent. Cultural heritage unites us. Ideals of freedom, justice, and democracy have inspired our peoples for more than 2 centuries. These originally European ideas were first transformed into political reality in what was then the newly independent United States. Transatlantic contacts and the exchange of ideas in the fields of science, technology, the media, entertainment, and the fine arts have greatly contributed to the dynamic development of our societies. During this century, the historical destinies of Europe and America have been tied more strongly than ever. Americans have twice been asked to help Europeans during the war. 50 years ago, General Marshall's plan established the groundwork for European integration. The United States military presence in Europe through NATO was essential to maintaining the Cold War balance. Finland, although neutral, benefited from a keen American involvement in European security. The aftermath of the civil wars in the former Yugoslavia has again demonstrated the value of the American contribution to European security. I'm pleased to see Finland and the United States as close partners in stabilizing peace in Bosnia. I consider the continuing American commitment to European security vitally important. I say this as much to express a national policy as to recognize a shared European interest. However, Europe cannot be a full partner of the United States if it does not have its own house in order. It is an objective for both parties that Europe should undertake greater responsibility for its own security. The importance of involving Russia in global economic interaction perhaps best illustrates our common interests. It seems that reformists and traditionalists cannot easily reach a consensus on Russia's future. Democratic structures do exist, but they are fragile. Economically, the country may have reached its lowest ebb. It is up to the Russians themselves to enact legislation to facilitate investment. It is clear that more time and support from outside are needed. However, if Russia turns inward, it will only weaken its impact on the globalizing world, not strengthen it. Therefore, it is imperative that determined joint efforts by Europeans and Americans be made in order to integrate this Eurasian power into international cooperation, a goal that is a prerequisite for long-term peace and stability that will affect us all. Consolidation of the norms and principles of the international law, political stability and military security, an ecologically friendly and socially sustainable development are in the joint interest of Europe and United States. A prosperous and strong America is an incentive for Europe. Both partners should have their share of the dividends and responsibilities implied by this cooperation. It is my conviction that an evolving transatlantic bond does not exclude, but indeed supports and complements our relations with other regions in the world. Close cooperation between Europeans and Americans is conducive for a healthier international system as a whole. What happens in one place matters in the other and vice versa. Global dialogue is urgently needed. Together we can contribute towards a better world for all. I thank you.
So thank you very much. President Ahtisaari has agreed to take some questions. Let me tell you how our procedures work here. We have microphones on either side of the aisle, and if you would like to put a question, please come to one of the microphones because this is recorded for rebroadcast on public radio. Say your name and state your question, and questions here usually end with a question mark and are not too long. So let me start with the question, or did you have a question? No. Please.
My name is Alexander Rossolimo. I'm president of International Strategy Associates. Mr. President, in order to join the European Union Finland had to meet some strict economic benchmarks, such as low inflation rate, low interest rates. Over the past several years, Finland has achieved an inflation rate of about 1%, which would make it the envy of most countries in the world. How did Finland achieve such remarkable economic results?
Thank you very much. I think you painted far too rosy picture of what we have been going through in Finland. First of all, in the beginning of the 90s, we had a very deep recession in Finland. But what we decided was that we had to get out of that, and now our GDP is on the same level as it was in the 1990s. We realized also that we needed, in the middle of 90s, an exceptionally broad-based government in Finland. We always have a coalition government in my country. It is with very few exceptions that we have had anything else. We then had a very broad coalition formed in 95. The coalition has 140 members of the parliament behind it out of the totality of 200 members of parliament. So it is exceptionally broad, consisting of two parties. Actually, the Leftist Alliance on the left side, Social Democrats, Swedish People's Party, moderates, actually the Conservative Party, and the Greens. And this coalition was able to agree on a very strict economic policy program, more detailed than any government that I am aware of. And their decision was to get the government finances in shape, increase the productivity. Even when we had the worst of recession, we have been putting a lot of money for research and development. And we have recently increased that to the extent that by year 99, this government expects, 2/3 of course comes from the private sector, to reach 2.9% of GDP for R&D expenditure. That will be among the highest in the world. I sometimes try to describe Finnish society by saying that we try to be aggressively creative and search for excellence so that we can provide a human society for our citizens.
Thank you.
May I add, if one is allowed, a few commercials here, that the awareness in my country is great. I saw an opinion poll recently, and well over 80% of the people asked felt that when we are entering now the salaries negotiations between the labor and the industry, that we should go for a low solution on the salaries so that we could keep the inflation low and also improve the productivity so that we would increase the employment possibilities. We have far too high unemployment still. The latest figure I saw was 12.3%. But when it comes to the terms and conditions for the third phase of EMU, there are only 3 countries among the member states of European Union. My country is one of those who are meeting actually all the requirements of that transformation and membership in. So we intend to be among the majority and in the first group to join 1st of January 99, the third phase of EMU.
We have a question from Professor Alan Henriksen, who's a professor from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy.
Thank you, Graham. President Ahtisaari, I would like to ask you about the northern dimension of the European Union of which you spoke. And my question is basically, is it possible for Finland, through its own efforts and leadership, fully to develop the northern dimension without, for example, the inclusion of Norway, which would increase the number of Nordic states in the European Union, which might therefore cause some restructuring of the Union, perhaps offsetting the Mediterranean orientation? And in the past, and perhaps at present, Finland has had very grand ambitions for the whole Arctic area, not just the Baltic. The Wärtsilä company built icebreakers, which went through the Northeast Passage, which you mentioned, even perhaps to go diametrically across the Arctic. in an Arctic train taking timber and oil and gas and so on to Japan.
True.
Isn't massive investment necessary, and doesn't this require more countries in the North, including Norway in particular, with investment from the US and other countries fully to develop this northern dimension?
You are absolutely right. I think Norway particularly has an important role, because Norwegians have been active, particularly in the Barents Sea area, perhaps more active than anybody else among us. So we are by no means thinking that we alone can do this. I think we have an extremely close cooperation in our neighborhood among the Nordic countries. It has perhaps been most active in the Baltic, around the Baltic Sea area, but it is moving towards the Barents Sea area, and therefore we welcome the role of the United States, Canada, England. I would say, I always tell my Norwegian friends, I have 25% of Norwegian blood in me, so I can be rather straightforward that please come not only to the Barents Sea area, but the Baltic Sea as well. We need your oil billions. So you are absolutely right. We need a very broad-based support for this sort of initiative.
Hi, my name is Will Bolin, and I'm a freshman in the college here. You talked about the globalization of the economy. What are your impressions on the euro dollar as a tool to increase the globalization?
First of all, from a point of view of a country of 5 million inhabitants, and where we are particularly trying to develop small and medium-sized industries, I think we see this stability in the currency markets as important. Many of these small and medium-sized enterprises who want to become international don't have the necessary expertise to deal with the currency issues. So I think one of the positive sides, I hope, will come from that. Of course, it will demand economic discipline in Finland as well, and I don't think that's a bad idea either.
Yes, sir, my name's Blair Ross from the National Security Program at the Kennedy School. From your perspective as a longtime non-aligned country, what is your impression of the expansion of the NATO alliance into Eastern Europe?
Actually, we called ourselves during the Cold War years neutral. So we made a little bit difference from those who advocated the non-alignment. We were not part of the non-aligned movement. But if we look at the history of Europe, and I think it's always important to look at the history. My wife is smiling because she's a history teacher by profession, so at least once I give credit for her profession. The countries and I tell you a recollection that I have from a meeting in the end of '94 when I attended as an observer when we had asked for membership in the European Union, the summit of EU in Essen, Germany. And Germans had invited 6 of the applicant countries who wanted to join the European Union from the Central Europe. And the topic of the luncheon discussion was security. And the feeling I got from that discussion, which was very brief, but everyone made their statements, that most of the countries were saying that we want to join NATO. There's the EU as well. All right, we'll come to EU as well. Why was it so? And that intrigued me tremendously because we were not ourselves looking for membership in the enlarged NATO. And I think history gives us an explanation because many of these countries, if you look at Poland, Czech Republic, Hungary, Baltic states, and many others, they have had a very harsh history behind them. They have had very bitter experiences which we haven't. We have, of course, had bitter experiences as well with our Soviet neighbors, but we were never occupied. We were never won in the battles to that extent that what happened, the occupation that took place by the Soviet Union of the Baltic states And therefore, these historical reasons perhaps explain why some of the other countries in Europe want to join NATO as fast as possible. I think a little bit too little, to my mind, was explained when we have talked about enlargement of NATO in a very theoretical terms, and not perhaps explained enough where the motivation, the desire to join NATO came from, and why was it so. We decided that we want to join the Partnership for Peace, the Euro-Atlantic Partnership Council, and we want to be in active cooperation with NATO. But when we considered that would our application for membership increase our security, would it help the European developments in general in a peaceful manner, our answer was honestly no. I definitely want that option to be open, and we have defended every country's right in Europe to decide on their own what sort of security arrangement they would like to have. So we have defended the right of the Central Europeans, the Baltic states, to decide for themselves what they want to do. And I hope that we respect their right, and I hope that they respect, and I'm sure they do, respect our right not to join at this particular moment. This is perhaps my answer on the, and I believe that this expansion of NATO with 3 member states will take place, and the ratification processes will be approved in the present member states.
Mr. President, if I could add, this has been a local issue for discussion around here quite a lot, and let me ask a follow-up question, if I could, to your answer to that question. As you think about the security problem for Finland, and as you can think, as you've done in your presentation, about indeed other countries in the region like the Baltics, and you think NATO, EU, WEU, would you tell us how you see the security structures evolving, and how you assess the advantages and disadvantages, not only for Finland but for the other countries?
So first of all, when I analyze the security threats in today's Europe and in our part of the world, they are basically non-military, and I refer to those. We have enormous problems of environmental concern, and we had a very good summer this time in Finland, and with the result that the Baltic Sea was not in a condition that one could swim in many parts on our coast. There are concerns about the state of the nuclear power plants, nuclear armaments in our neighborhood, in the same way as I referred to the organized crime. We have been spared in Finland about the organized crime for the simple reason that I think we are far too north. The main ways goes to the Central Europe, and secondly, we are too small to attract that sort of attention. So there are certain advantages of being off the main road. I think we regard the EU enlargement as extremely important. When we joined with Sweden and Austria, we never felt that this was the last enlargement of the European Union. I recently had an article in Dagerspiegel, and I said that within the next 10 years or so, at least we should get some sort of idea about 10 new member states. That would require, of course, that we look at the mechanisms, decision mechanisms in the European Union as well. The proposal now is to start, from the European Commission, is to start negotiations with 5 countries plus 1. Because there's an earlier decision to start negotiations with Cyprus and Malta. Malta have said no, thank you, new government doesn't want to negotiate. But the 5 countries were Poland, Czech Republic, Hungary, Slovenia, and Estonia. So we see that the enlargement of the European Union, it brings economic growth, economic prosperity through increased cooperation, and increases the stability in Europe. We think, and we made a proposal which was accepted in the Amsterdam summit, that there should be a closer cooperation between EU and Western European Union. There are certain tasks I'm sure certain Western European Union can perform, but for instance, if we think of a situation in Bosnia-Herzegovina, I think NATO is the only solution of today. I think these all have their own roles, and I would add to this the OSCE as well, and the Council of Europe, which is perhaps less well known in the world. It does important work in the human rights issues and democratization of the new democracies. Again, there was a very interesting discussion while I was in Strasbourg last week, because some people are always critical that why do we allow countries that are not full democracies to join? Again, I would refer to history. Had we decided after the Second World War that no, we don't want Germany in the European structures, how would the world look like? I think it was important that the Germany was brought to the structures that were developing in Europe, and that reinforced the democratic process and economic growth in Germany. The same motivation when we took Council of Europe, Russia, and some of the other countries who are by no means perfect democracies at the moment, far from that. But we hope that that interaction between the parliamentarians, between the government representatives, will, with the same motivation we had after the Second World War, will work in this case as well.
Matthew Kutcher, Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy and the Kennedy School here. My question is, Mr. President, with respect to the Baltic region.
Yes.
And a lot have been said here about the security issues. My question is more with regard to the economic question. I think I'm not sure whether you agree with me, but I think Finland was uniquely positioned after 1989 with respect to economic opportunities in the Baltic region, especially with regard to the three Baltic states, mainly due to the trade and economic interactions even before 1989. But Baltic region being and evolving now as one of the most interesting, most dynamic economic regions in Europe, how do you position Finland within that framework, and how do you see opportunities, perhaps not in Silicon Valley, but perhaps there in the Baltic region, within the Baltic Sea, especially with regard to the republics and also other countries? And how do you see Finnish economic expansion in those countries?
No, it's rather natural for historical reasons as well, that because the Estonia is just on the other side of from us over the Baltic Sea, that we have a closest cooperation. We are, I think, the biggest investor in Estonia at the moment. And there's a lot of economic activity between our two countries. So we are important to each other. There's a growing interest in Latvia and Lithuania. As a small nation, it will take time before we expand, but there's a clear trend that the activities are increasing in all three countries. And we are not the only ones. I think there's a good possibility for joint ventures, and those have been mushrooming in these countries. And I think what is important that there is, as we try to also offer our expertise on Russia and some of the Eastern European countries, there's an excellent expertise, linguistic capabilities in Baltic states, in all of them. So they can be extremely helpful if one wants to be active in the markets in the neighborhood. So I see the prospects very good, and I think they are seriously working on improving the institutional structures and I think making good progress.
If I can, just a very brief follow-up.
Yeah.
European Union, it seems to be, we are not sure when all those Baltic countries are going to come to the European Union, and especially also with regards to Russia, which is a major player in the Baltic Sea. How do you see those developments also going with regards to the countries which are going to stay outside of the European Union? And how is Finland going to address that question? You know, the tension between the countries are going to be left outside and the countries are going to be in.
No, I'm aware, and I have, I have recently been in Vilna, attending a seminar where I was a guest speaker over lunch. And I'm waiting the president of Latvia to be my guest in 2 weeks' time in Finland. And we have close contacts. So there was a certain bitterness when the European Commission published its findings. On the basis of criteria the membership in the European Union had decided. And the ruling of the Commission was that at this stage Estonia is qualifying so that discussions should start. I think we all agree that we should minimize the difference between those applicant countries with whom we start the negotiations on the basis of decisions in Luxembourg in December this year. Hopefully we start them early next year. And help those other applicant countries to prepare themselves so that they can be considered for membership as quickly as possible. So we try to minimize those differences. The motivation is clear. We want them all to become applicable as soon as possible.
Good evening, Mr. President. My name is Anish Venkatraman. I'm a freshman at the college. I actually met you 2 years ago as a Finland Youth Senate exchange.
Yes, I remember.
And I would like to add that that was probably the best summer that I've spent. My question is in relation to the Helsinki summit. I was wondering if you'd comment on some of your impressions.
Would you like to know how we got the summit to Finland? Your ambassador is here. I think all the actors are actually here. I happened to be sitting in my official residence one Sunday afternoon, and I have quite a number of channels in my TV room. And there was a Meet the Press program where Secretary Albright was being interviewed. And the question was raised that if for one reason or another President Yeltsin couldn't travel to the United States, what would happen with the summit? And she said, no, then we have to consider perhaps other locations in Europe. I stopped watching the program and ran to the telephone, called Dr. Rusi, one of my 4 civilian assistants. I want to make a point that the President of Finland has an enormous number of assistants. I have 4 civilians. I rushed to the phone, called him, and I said, please call Ambassador Scherer of the United States and offer Finland as a place. So he did as I was asking him, and Ambassador Scherer acted extremely fast, and it didn't take too long. The first reaction was that the idea of the program was not to solid invitations for places where the summit could be held, but very soon they came back and said, now it has been proposed to the President, and we intend to take it up with the Russian representatives. And that's how the whole thing went. And we had the summit. I think the summit was extremely important because that paved the way for many things, for the developments that we have seen in Europe. President Yeltsin stayed after this summit with President Clinton for a working visit, and I had a day with him. And I think everybody was pleased, and the hosts were pleased because the meeting had been successful. I gave my official residence, and my wife and I disappeared for a day. They had the full house at their disposal, even one of the guest bedrooms if they wanted to have a nap in between or rest. And when I left them in my living room, I said, I expect you two to have some results when we meet in the evening. So I have now provided the electricity and atmosphere, so it's up to you now. So it worked very well. Please.
My name is Maeve, but given the issues you were addressing earlier with the Baltic Sea being polluted, I'm not sure exactly what the issue is around that, but, and the oil reserves, how do you see that balance between an economic opportunity and further contribution to environmental degradation?
If there's no economic progress, there's no progress on the environmental issues either. Because during the communist era, the environmental issues were totally neglected. And that you can see everywhere in the former communist countries in Europe. And therefore, I think we have to get the economy going, because through that you can improve the living condition, the social conditions, and also the awareness. The awareness is there. It's not that people are not aware, but you need the funds. But the funds are now the greatest scarcity. So therefore, I think we have to be active on all fronts.
Steve Bloomfield, who runs the Fellows Program at the Center for International Affairs and is the co-host of this event.
Thanks, Graham. Mr. President, I wonder if you would do us the favor of offering some reflections on sub-Saharan Africa, since you have so much experience there, and it would be unfortunate for you to leave Harvard without saying something about bonding your past with your reflections on the global international system in the 21st century. Where do you see sub-Saharan Africa going within the next 10 to 20 years? And maybe you could offer some specific reflections on Namibia, which you know so well.
I have to make a confession that my heart is very much with the African continent. Both my wife and I are honorary citizens of Namibia, which I thought was the nicest thing that the Namibians could have done for us. I ran the UN operation in Namibia from 89 to 90 with 8,000 other co-workers. And as you know, it was one of the success stories in UN history. And I would give the greatest compliment to the Namibians the way how they behaved during the transition period, despite some difficulties we had, and what a democratic constitution they were able to agree extremely fast. They are facing difficulties at the moment. Employment issues are all over, and in Africa particularly a problem. Expectations after independence is gained are enormous, and for any government it's a major challenge. I sincerely hope that the South Africa, as a major economic power in the southern Africa, can play the role that I think whether it wants or not, it has to play. Because if it succeeds economically, this will spread economic growth also in the southern part of Africa. You have noticed that the Secretary General has asked for UN troops to be sent to Republic of Congo. It may be too late. I talked to somebody this morning who knows the region extremely well, an old friend of mine, and it looked like things have developed so fast, and the former president had taken the control of the country, so I think this came a bit too late. Again, I sincerely hope, and may I say that my wife and I visited South Africa in May this year, and we went from South Africa to Tanzania, where I served as a Finnish ambassador from 1973 to beginning of 77 when we moved to New York. And it was quite an experience. The president there, Mr. Benjamin Mkapa, is a dear friend of ours, a close friend for many years. And when we started thinking that when we were there in the mid-70s, there were 15 million people living in the country. Now the population was 29 million. So if I sometimes think that my task is difficult as the president of Finland, I could easily confess to him that it is nothing compared to what he has to try to do. He is committed to improve the democracy, deal with the corruption that is there, and try to improve the possibilities of the people. But there you face the reality. My wife stayed a week after I left and went to the southern part of the country to look at the developmental activities there. And she was very sad to realize that more people went to school when we were there, more people stayed, more youngsters stayed in the school for a longer period of time. So, that is the reality. And I think the international community should support all those countries who are themselves determined to improve in a democratic fashion the lot of their citizens. I'm afraid we are not doing that at the moment.
So I think that with that question, we probably have come to the end of the workday. The President has been very kind to give us this much time, and I would like to say how much the Harvard community has enjoyed the opportunity for this visit and how much we hope you'll come back for a subsequent visit. So.
You are not perhaps aware that when I was speaking here in the early 80s, I think it was Les Brown who wrote me a kind letter and invited me to become a fellow in the center. And I was just talking with my co-workers today that perhaps when I'm not a president anymore, I will take you up. He's not here anymore, but I think the offer is still valid.
This offer is still standing. We've just agreed. So thank you. Yes, thank you very much.